And for more, let's bring in John Aughenbaugh, Associate Professor of Political Science at Virginia Commonwealth University. Professor, this is crunch time for Trump and Harris. In the final push, Harris is dedicating her entire day to Pennsylvania, while Trump is beginning in North Carolina, where he campaigned for 3 consecutive days. I mean, what do you think these choices tell you about their last-minute strategies?
Well, I think for Vice President Harris, the importance of Pennsylvania is pretty clear. For her campaign to achieve 270 electoral college votes and win the race, Pennsylvania in particular is essential. You combine Pennsylvania with, for instance, Michigan and Wisconsin, the infamous blue wall. Her path to victory becomes significantly easier. For former President Trump, without North Carolina, he would basically have to go ahead and win at least Pennsylvania and one of Michigan and or Wisconsin just to even have a chance. So their campaign events the day before the election should tell us quite a bit about what they think is their path to victory.
Professor, I want to ask you about early voting, which has closed in most states and not all by now. The data is very interesting because it shows that less voted early overall at the national level, but more in the key swing states. So what is that telling you?
It's telling us, or at least I think it should be telling many about how voters in those battleground or swing states are motivated in regards to the election. And this cuts both ways for both candidates. If most of the early voters are women voters, for instance, as your previous segment just indicated, that should be a good sign for the Harris campaign because polls have told us that women are very supportive of Vice President Harris's campaign. On the other hand, it should also give us... Yes, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Please finish what you were saying, Professor.
But for political scientists in general, just because in some states early voting has declined, that may indicate that many of the voters in those states have already come to a conclusion about what will be the outcome in that state. So early voting in these swing states should indicate that there is quite a bit of interest among voters in how their state will actually decide in terms of outcome.
All right, Professor, very quickly, I just want to ask you about what Tim Walz just said in Wisconsin. I'm going to quote him. It may feel like we're running like everything's on the line because it is. I'm wondering, about the messaging here. American voters, we understand, are anxious and scared in a different way from 2020. I mean, what tends to happen when people feel this way when they go to the voting booth?
It's really hard to go ahead and put a finger on what that kind of anxiety will do for an individual voter. I understand that within the Democratic Party, they are extremely concerned about another 4 years if former President Trump won a second term. On the other hand, for many of us who teach political science, the institutions withstood not only the Trump presidency, but also made sure that the country continued to run. And I'll leave it to others to decide how effectively, even though increasingly it became obvious that the current president has suffered from some mental decline. So in both of those instances, a lot of this a lot of this rhetoric is somewhat hyperbolic. And is it a tactic to go ahead and motivate one's party's voters to come out, or does it actually reflect the fear and anxiety that particular voters might have about another 4 years of former President Trump, or another 4 years of a Democratic regime, Democratic Party?
Speaking of rhetoric, Professor, another violent language by Trump. We heard his remarks on shooting at press, media. I mean, Trump's messaging in the past few days and months has been largely leaning into extreme, dark, fear-based rhetoric, but the crowds keep coming. I mean, what do you think drives people to find these comments acceptable? What sort of factors contribute to their resonance with the audience?
I'm not even entirely sure that many of Trump's supporters do find the rhetoric acceptable. I think in part, what Trump's appeal is to so many of his supporters is the desire to challenge elites and those institutions that many of his supporters feel have largely ignored them over the last couple decades or so. There is a rather remarkable willingness of Trump supporters to either brush off this kind of violent, heated rhetoric, which historically would not be acceptable, or they just go ahead and laugh it off, in part because they don't necessarily think that former President Trump, if he got another term, would actually do some of the things that he has suggested.
All right. Well, Professor, we'll have to leave it there for now. Well, thank you very much for your insight and expertise this morning. We're speaking with John Aughenbaugh, Associate Professor of Political Science at Virginia Commonwealth University.